about ready to start. We're going to record the program this evening so that some people who asked they're going to miss it tonight, they want to see it tomorrow night. So they'll get to see it tomorrow night. And I want to thank everybody for signing up and joining us this evening. This definitely makes it more fun and festive, even if we can't all be in the same room. It's nice to see everybody on the screen.
It really is.
Much better than just having two people sitting at a table. Although interestingly, the rabbis tell the story that even if there's only one person at the table and he already knows the whole Haggadah, he's got to say it out loud anyway. He's got to do the whole story, even to himself or herself. But anyway, it's much nicer this way, and this is the best we can do. So welcome to the second annual COVID Seder,
Oh,
and hopefully the last one.
amen.
This year we are in our houses. Next year, may we all gather together in person. In any case, because this is a Saturday night and we're starting before it's dark outside, it's after sunset, but before dark outside, we are mixing up the order of the Seder slightly so that we do a couple of essential things after it's dark. What are those things? Lighting the candles for the festival, which has to be done after Shabbat is over. Saying Havdalah, which obviously has to be done after Shabbat is over, and saying Shehechianu, because it follows the Havdalah. So we're going to save those three elements until later, even though we're going to sing the order of the Seder in a moment. It's not the order we're actually going to do the stuff in. And the other thing is, even on a normal Seder that's done on a Saturday night, if we had waited another 45 minutes to start and it's dark outside, it is a little different to do the Seder after Shabbat is over rather than a weekday. And the rabbis created a mnemonic device for that. So I'm going to share that with you just to take up a little extra time. And that is Yak Nahaz. So Yak Nahaz is an acronym of Hebrew letters. The Yud for Yah stands for Yayin. So that's the blessing over wine. And then the Kuf for Yak is Kiddush. So you say the blessing over wine, the blessing for Kiddush. And then Na is Ner. That's when you would light the festival candles after you make Kiddush. And then Nehaz. So the next thing is H is Havdalah. That's when you say Havdalah. And the last thing is Zion, which is Zman, which is the blessing Shechianu. So those last three things, Ner, Havdalah, and Shechianu, that's what we're going to be doing later. Okay, and with all that in mind, we are now going to bless our children as the first thing that we do at the Seder. So for all the girls, let's say, Yisimech Elohim Kesara Rivka Rachel Leah. May God make you like our ancestors, our great matriarchs Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And for the boys, we say Yisimcha Elohim Ke Ephraim Menashe. May God make you like Ephraim and Menashe. And for all our children, we say, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May the Holy One bless you and watch over you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. May the Holy One's light shine upon you and be kind to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Holy One always be mindful of you and grant you peace and happiness now and always.
Amen.
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 So now we've blessed our children. We're now going to do the order of the service. So if you have the handout PDF file, you can download it. The download for it is in the chat box. Actually, before we actually do that, let me make a promotion for the Haggadah we're using. On my screen, it's backwards. It's a night to remember, right? This is what it looks like. And it's written by one of my teachers from Israel, Noam Tzion, and his son, Mishael Tzion. And I think it's a fun Haggadah. That's why I chose it. It has tons of readings, tons of pictures, conversation starters, questions, to make it an interesting, lively Seder. You could buy this book for next year for your own Seders. And you could use the same book for the next 10 years. You're doing different readings every year, and it would be you'd have a different Seder every year talking about different things. So that's why I chose it. And but selected pages are what we're using tonight. Again, you can access that in the chat box. The other thing that you can access in the chat box is the end of the Seder meal. we decided that it's difficult for 50 people zooming in together to eat dinner together and chat like normal, a conversation. It's a little complicated with Zoom. So what we did is we pre-recorded actually last year the Birkat Hamazon and the ending parts of the Seder. We were a little tired when we recorded it, but we were going to re-record it. We decided just to leave it the way it was. So there's a link in the chat box to the ending part of the Seder that you can watch after you're done with your meal. It includes the grace after the meals and the songs of Hallel and other songs. Okay, so with all of that introduction out of the way, we are now going to do the order of the service, which is found on page 8 of the Haggadah. The page numbers are also in the PDF file. So even though I skipped a lot of pages, the page numbers still show up. So page 8.
Kadesh orchatz karpas yachatz magid raksa motzi matzah maror korech shulchan norech tzafun barech halel nirtzah.
So as I'm sure all of you know, the word Seder means order, and that is the order of the sort of the signposts of the things that are supposed to be done traditionally during the course of the Seder. So the first thing is Kadesh, and we will do Kadesh first, which is on page 10. However, you'll notice on page 10 in the small paragraph toward the bottom in kind of gray letters is Havdalah. That's the part we're going to save till the second glass of wine. And the Shechianu below it, we also save to the second glass of wine. So we're going to do that a little bit later. But right now, Diane is going to sing the blessing over the first glass of wine, and then the Kiddush, which declares that this day is a special holy day.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol am v'romemanu mikol lashon v'kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav. Vatiten lanu Adonai Eloheinu v'yahava moadim l'simcha chagim uzmanim l'sason et yom chag hamatzot hazeh saman cherutenu mikra kodesh zecher l'tziat mitzrayim kilvanu v'acharta ve'otanu kiddashta mikol ha'amim Umoatei kodshecha besimcha usason hinchatanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh Yisrael hazmanim.
Amen.
Amen.
So the Seder meal, as again, you might know already, the Seder meal was actually structured after the temple was destroyed in the year 70, as far as we can tell. Nobody wrote down that this elaborate meal took place before the destruction of the temple. So we believe what happened before was the centerpiece was the Passover lamb that was eaten with matzah and bitter herbs, as the Torah commands. And the Torah also says your children should ask you, what are you doing? Why are we having this particular meal tonight? And you should explain to them about the story of the Passover. That's the total description of what the Seder looked like in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses. And for all we know, that's pretty much what the Seder meal was like until the temple was destroyed. But when it's destroyed and we could no longer bring the Passover lamb as a sacrifice, that's the centerpiece of the meal. It's gone. So then the rabbi said, well, we have to fill out the picture. We'll draw on different rabbinic and biblical sources to sort of make a more elaborate ceremony. And the other thing they did when they did this was they modeled themselves after what was a big fancy banquet in the secular world, or what was then the Greco-Roman world, right? So, and that banquet formula is still done in America and most of the Western world today, most commonly seen at wedding banquets, for instance. right? So at a wedding banquet, you see before the guests move into the dining room to have the main course, what do? They have hors d'oeuvres. And hors d'oeuvres are frequently crudité, that's the official word I'm told for that, cut up vegetables that are then dipped in various sauces to make them taste better, right? And that's what you eat so that you don't feel famished before you get to the main course that's inside. People don't ask, when do we eat? Because they're already having some hors d'oeuvres, something to eat. Another thing that's done at a wedding ceremony is you have champagne or wine. And during the course of the meal, various people stand and they say, let's make a toast to the bride and groom. And they lift the cup of wine or the champagne and they make a toast and then everybody drinks, right? And so the rabbis put in 4 glasses of wine at various points in the meal to sort of recognize that kind of aspect of a banquet. But the first thing we do is what I described it before, which is the hors d'oeuvres. And that is this green celery. We have celery. Some people use parsley, but anything that grows out of the ground. You'll notice that karpas, which is found on page 12 of the Haggadah handout, you'll see that there's a little note about karpas, and it says, originating from the Greek, karpas means fruit of the soil. And we have a special blessing for things that grow out of the ground, Bore Pri Ha'adama. So that's the blessing we're going to recite before we have our hors d'oeuvres. Some people like to say that we pick green things particularly because it's springtime. Our lawn has turned green after the big freeze of last month, and it is springtime. Passover always falls in springtime, but it has to be something that grows out of the ground. The tradition was to, the leader would wash their hands beforehand. So off camera here, I have a hand washing cup, which I will use. And you can hear the water pouring. You didn't see it, but you did hear it. And I'm gonna wash and dry my hands here.
While you're doing that, I went to a Seder in New York. Oh, it was probably 40 years ago. And there was a huge blizzard on the first night of Passover, which reminds me of how we were discussing how in Poland, people would use things like potatoes for karpas because they might not have
Green things yet.
green vegetables when in a northern place where it's cold.
But you could use carrots and potatoes, which grow on the ground. So, okay. So if you have a green vegetable at home, something or some kind of vegetable that grows out of the ground, take a piece of it. You're going to dip it in salt water to remind us of the tears of slavery. And we're going to say the blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Pri Ha'adama.
Amen.
Amen.
Now, I know a lot of people just eat that or just that one little piece of vegetable and then they go on with the rest of the story. But if you have more vegetables at your home set out on the table, we normally put out a big tray of vegetables so everybody has stuff to eat. And again, they don't ask, when do we get to eat already? Because they're already eating vegetables that are dipped in not just salt water, but we put out French dressing, Thousand Island dressing, all kinds of other dressings. So it makes it interesting. We didn't do that tonight for the two of us, but normally that's how we do our Seder. So feel free to eat more vegetables as we continue on with the story.
So now we're going to invite Nick and Lizette, if you're around, on page 14.
Okay. All right. Page 14, entering the broken world. The Pesach story begins in a broken world amidst slavery and oppression. The sound of the breaking of matzah sends us into that fractured existence, only to become whole again when we find the broken half, the afikomen, at the end of the Seder. This brokenness is not just a physical or political situation. In Hebrew, Egypt is called Mitzrayim, reminding us of the word tsar, narrow. Thus, in Hasidic thought, Mitzrayim symbolizes the inner straits that trap our souls, yet even here we can find a unique value. As the Hasidic saying teaches us, there is nothing more whole than a broken heart. Or as Leonard Cohen wrote, there's a crack in everything. That's where the light comes in. Some families pass out a whole matzah to every Seder participant, inviting them to take a moment to ponder this entrance into a broken world before they each break the matzah themselves.
Okay, so if you have matzah at home and you'd like to break it at home, I'm going to break ours over here and we'll be entering a broken world. It's supposed to break in half, but as you can see, it never does. So you're supposed to take the smaller half, put the second one, the other half away for later. Actually, this is the one that's supposed to go. We have here a special afikomen bag. And we're going to stick it in the afikomen bag for later. I hope one of you will hide this for me. And we'll have to go search the house afterwards to find it. Maybe we'll search your house because maybe it's transported over there. Anyway, we're going to take the smaller half. And this is the one we hold up and we're going to sing Ha Lachma Anya, which on page 20.
Halakma anya di akalu avatana be'ara demitrayim be'ara demitrayim kodik fin yete ve'yakul kodik tzrich yete ve'yifsach Hashataha Leshana haba be'arad Yisrael Hashatavde Leshana haba b'nei chorin.
Okay, that's beautiful. Yeah, is Karine Liebster here?
Yes.
So Pastor Karine Liebster is going to tell us what this means in English.
This is the bread of poverty and persecution that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are in need come and share the Pesach meal. This year, we are still here. Next year, in the land of Israel. This year, we are still slaves. Next year, free people.
So, so this is the idea that we live in a broken world. The world is not complete, but Passover is the holiday of redemption, the day when we hope that one day, 1 year, it will represent the day of freedom for everybody, and everybody will live in freedom and peace and harmony. And that's why we invite Elijah, by the way, to the Seder meal, because Elijah is supposed to usher in that messianic time. But for now, we remember that the world is not perfect. And many of the symbols on the Seder plate, although they remind us particularly of our experience of slavery in Egypt, it also reminds us that there's suffering in all parts of the world today, continues to be suffering today. And as the Bible commands us over and over again, love your neighbor as yourself, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, that we're supposed to treat everybody with justice and dignity and respect. And this is that it's sort of woven into our DNA, because remembering that we were slaves in Egypt is what reminds us that we need to take care of each other, take care of the people on the planet. And so the holiday, as we break the bread and say, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt, they don't get a whole loaf, they get only a piece of a loaf, and it doesn't rise like it would be nice bread. It's flat bread, just cracker-like bread. So as we remember slavery, we remember that it's our obligation to help make the world a better place today.
Before we go forward, I just want to remind people that if you're not leading a prayer at a particular time, that it's good to mute your screen, to mute your microphone, because we can hear you if you are talking.
Yeah, okay. So now we're going to go to Manish Tana. The next thing that our ancestors did was they said, look, the Bible even says your children are going to ask you what you're doing. And that is an important part of the Seder. And even if you don't have kids, if it's only adults, and they said, even if it's only wise people who've studied the Haggadah backwards and forwards, somebody at the table has to ask a question. That's how important questions are. And so we usually give the youngest person at the Seder the opportunity to sing the 4 questions, which is on page 24.
So first I'm going to ask, is Nava here? Nava, are you here? Okay, well then, Jenna, I am going to take you up on your kind offer to sing Manish Tana for us. Thank you so much.
We had a family who was going to do it, but they got stuck in traffic or something. So, yeah. Okay, so now we're going to do the 4 questions. It's on page 24.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Mom.
Uh-oh.
Oh, it sounds like you might have 2 devices on at the same
I
time.
need to say. Just close it. Close your computer. Just
You have to turn one off.
Yeah, you have to turn one of the devices off.
שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים חמץ ומצה, חמץ ומצה. הלילה הזה כולו מצה. הלילה הזה כולו מצה. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים ירקות, ירקות. הלילה הזה מרור, מרור. הלילה הזה מרור. שבכל הלילות אין אנו מגבילים אפילו פעם אחת, אפילו פעם אחת. הלילה הזה שתי פעמים. הלילה הזה שתי פעמים. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים בין דבין ובין מסרובין, בין יושבין ובין מסרובין. הלילה הזה כולנו מסרובים. הלילה הזה כולנו מסרובים.
Okay.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Beautiful.
Kol hakavod.
So the 4 questions here are just sample questions. And they ask you about the symbols on the Seder plate, right? Why do we eat matzah? Why can't we eat bread, right? And we already mentioned it's the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. So that's why we're eating that. And the children ask, why are we eating bitter herbs? And that's to remind us of the bitterness of slavery. Why do we dip our vegetables? That apparently was not a custom. I guess normally we don't do that either, but it is a custom at Greco-Roman banquets. We also have other reasons for doing the dippings, but for now, we'll just leave it at that. We're dipping it to make it fancier because it's a fancy dinner. We're not just eating plain vegetables, we're dipping them in sauces. The second one, by the way, is going to be in the charoset. So we did the first one in salt water. And the last thing is, why do we recline? And most of us don't recline anymore. We sit on regular chairs, but it was the custom in the Greco-Roman world to recline on sofas. They had these kind of sofas that had they sort of looked like this. They kind of rolled up like this, and you would recline on them. And if you saw them in the ancient movies, the old movies from Hollywood, they'd be eating their grapes like this while they recline. And of course, if you are right-handed, that means you want to recline on your left side so that your right hand can hold the food for you. So that was the tradition. as we now it's more to eat at banquets on regular chairs, so you don't have to recline. Some people put pillows down to make it a little more cushy, so to speak. The idea is that we're supposed to feel like we're really well-established people, that we're not slaves anymore, we're the opposite of slaves. Okay, so those are the 4 questions, and now we're going to have a reading about questions on page 26. And I think the person who's going to read that question isn't here. So does somebody want to read that? It's on 26. Questions are a paradox.
I'll read it, Rabbi.
Okay, you got it.
And I'm reclining too while I read.
Excellent.
Oops. The key to Jewish exegesis is to assume that nothing is obvious. Questions are the great cultural paradox. They both destabilize and secure social norms. Nikita Khrushchev, one-time leader of the Soviet Union, once explained why he hated Jews. He said, "They always ask why." Questions tend to democratize. Ease with questions conveys a fundamental trust in the goodwill and the good sense of others. Autocrats hate questions. We train children at the Passover Seder to ask why, because tyrants are undone and liberty is won with a good question. It is for this reason that God loves it when we ask why. Consequently, we celebrate challenging the Torah to make sense, and above all, to be a defensible expression of divine goodness. When we ask good questions, the Torah is given anew on Sinai at that very moment.
So
Thank you.
thank you for reading that. So it probably posed a lot of thoughts in our heads, and unfortunately we don't have the convenience of talking about them now because we're not sitting at the same table. So what I want to suggest is that some of these readings are things you may want to come back to while you're eating your meals at home with whoever is with you. But you can see that this would be a provocative thing for people to talk about, the importance of questions and how it undoes tyrants and how it kind of forces us to think critically about the Torah and how it makes sense for our world. But any of these things, entering a broken world, the reading that Nick and Lizette read, also could be a conversation starter that you may want to follow up on at your Seder meal. For now, we're going to go on to some of the answers. So there were several answers to the question. I mean, the simple answer to the question is, why do we eat bitter herbs? It's because it reminds us of the bitterness of slavery. But the big answer to all those questions is, why is this night different? What is special about it? What are we trying to do tonight that's different from every other night? And that's the main question of the evening. And the answer was given by several different rabbis in different centuries in different ways. And we're going to read one of those answers now from a rabbi who is, it's on page 28. And this is by Rabbi Shmuel. So in Babylonia, in the 3rd century, there were 2 main academies. One was Yale and the other was Harvard. And they each had their own rabbinical schools. And Rav was the head of Yale's law school, and Shmuel was the head of Harvard's law school. Now, it turns out that Rav was an expert in ritual matters. We're going to see him a little bit later. But Shmuel was an expert in civil law. And he gives the common sense answer to the question, what are we doing tonight? We're remembering that we were slaves and now we're free. First of all, that's the common sense answer. That's what the night's about. But it also fits his particular area of expertise, which is civil law, how we treat each other, right? So from slavery to freedom is the most important thing to him. So we're going to read.
First, we're going to sing Avadim Hayinu.
Avadim Hayinu. We're
And
going to
then
sing.
Linda's going to.
Okay, page 28.
Avadim hayinu hayinu leparo b'mitzrayim Avadim hayinu ata b'nei chorin Avadim hayinu Ata b'nei chorin b'nei chorin. Ata b'nei chorin b'nei chorin. And now Linda and Avram and possibly Eliana are going to read for us.
When in time to come, your children ask you what is the meaning of the decrees, laws, and rules that Adonai our God has enjoined upon you, you shall say to your children, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Adonai freed us from Egypt, and with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Adonai produced before our eyes great and awful signs and wonders in Egypt against Pharaoh and all his household. Sorry, my eyesight. God freed us from there so that God could take us and give us the land that had been promised to us on oath to our ancestors.
Okay, beautiful.
Thank you.
So I just want to point out at the end of that paragraph, it says Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 20 to 23. That whole part of the English thing that Linda just read, it comes from those verses in Deuteronomy. If you want to know the context for that, first of all, the beginning of that paragraph is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. Right, so that's toward the beginning of that same chapter of Deuteronomy. Toward the end of it is the question of the wise son, which we're going to see in a few minutes. What is the meaning of the decrees, laws, and rules that Adonai our God has enjoined upon you? Right, that's the question of the wise son. And the answer given to the wise son in the Torah is the answer that Shmuel chose to be the answer for why we're celebrating the evening tonight. It's a good summary of what this holiday is supposed to be about. So now we're going to go to page 32.
Yes, and that's Simone. Simone.
So I saw Simone come in.
Simone, are you there? Huh. Okay, so I guess you'll read it.
Okay. Well, so page 32. If God had not taken our ancestors out of Egypt, then we would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt, along with our children and our children's children. So even if, oh, are you there?
we couldn't unmute.
Good, you got it. Take it away.
You can start over at the beginning.
Right at if God had not taken our ancestors out of Egypt, then we would have still been enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt, along with our children and our children's children. Even if all of us are wise, all of us discerning, all of us veteran scholars, all of us knowledgeable in Torah, it is still a mitzvah for us to retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. So the more and the longer one expands and embellishes the story, the more commendable it is.
And that's why there's all these, thank you very much, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's why there's all these conversation starters in this Haggadah, because, you know, even while you're eating the main course, you want to have some time to talk about what it means to be slaves, what it means to be free, what are the problems in the world that we still need to address, and so on. So it makes for a good evening. So now we are going to do page 40.
We're going to do the 4 children with the white staff.
Right. So here, the purpose of this particular passage of talking about different kinds of children is to, another thing the rabbis wanted us to do was to engage everybody who's at the table. So some kids are like 5 years old and you have to talk to them like 5-year-olds. Some people are in high school and you have to talk to them like high school students. Some people are getting a PhD in physics or something, so you need to talk to them. I don't know what I would say to a person getting a PhD in physics, but find something to say, right? The point is, and some people are artistic and some people are musical and some people have different talents and skills. And everybody at the table has to be engaged in this project of talking about what it means to be a free people. And so the way they kind of expressed that idea was they took 4 passages from the Torah where a child is asking a question and they labeled them. This is a smart kid, this is a rebellious kid, this is a simple kid. And then there's one place where there's no question, but the parents are still instructing, this is what God did for us when he came out of Egypt. So since there was no question, they said, that's a child who can't even formulate a question. You still need to address those kids too. So that's what this is. And now we're going to get the White's family doing the 4 children, page 40.
Blessed be God, blessed be that one, blessed be the giver of the Torah to the people of Israel. Blessed be that one.
The Torah alludes to 4 children.
One wise or thoughtful.
One wicked or rebellious.
One simpler is innocent. One who does not know how to ask.
What does the wise child say?
What are the testimonies that the statute and the laws which Adonai our God has commanded you?
So you teach the child all the laws of Pesach till the last one?
We do not conclude the eating at Pesach Seder with the Afikomen.
Okay, now to page 44.
What does the wicked child say?
Whatever does this service mean to you?
This child emphasizes you and not him or herself, since the child excludes him or herself from the community and rejects a major principle of faith. You should set his or her teeth on edge and say,
It is because of this that Adonai did for me when I went free from Egypt.
I just want to interrupt 1 second for a moment and say it's not probably good pedagogical procedure these days to set their teeth on edge. So, and actually I had a teacher who said that actually you should take this child's question very seriously because it's a good question. Why do we care anymore today about the story from the Exodus of Egypt? So you really have to think about a good answer for that child and not set their teeth on edge. But okay, now we're going to go on with the rest of the story.
you read it? Me and not that one over there. Had that one been there, she or he would not have been redeemed. So what does the simple child ask?
What is this?
And you say to that child,
With a mighty hand, Adonai brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.
48.
aren't we finished?
As for the child who does not know how to ask, you should prompt the child. The Torah says you should tell your child on that day.
It is because of this that Adonai did for me when I went free from Egypt.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's terrific. That was great. So I think, I don't remember which pages I gave you. There's some pages of pictures of the 4 children, and I don't remember which ones are included, but I think you have the picture of the 4 daughters that are in there. That was on page 43 instead of 4 sons. And then there's the Marx brothers, which was on page 44, right? Groucho is the wise child and Chico is the rebellious one. And of course, Harpo is the one who doesn't know how to ask because he can't talk. And there was a picture of books on fire. I don't know if you have the one, there's a book on fire picture. Is that in there? Yeah. So there's a book that's open and has words on it. That's the wise child. The one on fire is presumably the rebellious child. The simple child is an open book, but they're blank pages. And then the one who doesn't know how to ask is a closed book. Kind of clever artistic design there. And the last one, which I thought was, I didn't understand. This was in the Haggadah my parents used when I was growing up and I didn't get it. It has 4 people with different colors, right? That's on page 53. And that shows us that really we all have all 4 kinds of kids within each one of us. We're all a little rebellious. We're all a little simple. Sometimes we don't know what to say. And sometimes some of us know what we're talking about. So we have all 4 elements of those 4 children types in each one of us. Okay, so now we're going to do page 56. And this is the answer that Rav, the one from Yale Law School, this was the Yale Law School dean's answer to the question, what are we doing tonight? He didn't want to start the story with the Exodus from Egypt or that we were slaves in Egypt. That's the obvious place to start the story. He said, you know what? If we're going to talk about the story of our people at this important meal where we've gathered the whole family and all our friends around the table, we should start at the beginning of the story. And the beginning of the story is with Abraham, who walked away from idolatry, right? Now, he has maybe two reasons for wanting to start the story there. First of all, we consider Abraham the first Jew. So if you're going to tell the history, start from the first Jew. The second is, of course, his area of expertise, remember, is ritual matters. Those are matters of us dealing with God, with the creator of the universe. That's his area of expertise. And so the most important thing for him is that we became monotheists. We started to believe in only one God. So let's start the story where we started being monotheists with Abraham. So that is on page 56. And I said we're not going to read it now, but you can read it on your own. That's what he says. But at the beginning, our ancestors were idolaters, right? That's talking about Abraham's parents, basically.
And then now we're going to continue with Phyllis Miller is going to read for us on page 60, if she's here.
Is Phyllis here?
Okay, well, I'll read it.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Go for it.
Muted, sorry.
That's good. Great.
Blessed is the one who keeps the promise to Israel. My page keeps turning on my iPad, so.
I hate it when that happens.
It's driving me crazy. So I have a piece of paper. Blessed is the one who keeps the promise to Israel. The Holy One calculated the end of our exile and acted just as promised to Abraham, our father, at the covenant between the pieces. God said to Abram, you should know that your seed will be strangers in a land not their own. The people of that land will enslave and afflict them for 400 years. But that nation whom they serve, I will judge. Afterwards, your seed will go out with great wealth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're gonna hold off. I'm gonna say something about that, but let's read the next page too. Is 62 on our list? Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So Vahisha Amda, we're gonna do that first, and then I'll explain why we're doing that.
So first talk about covering the matzah. Right?
Oh, right. Cover the matzah. Well, we did cover the matzah. So
Okay,
yeah.
so we already did that.
Yeah.
So if you want to introduce it, then Leah's going to sing it.
Oh, okay. Leah, why don't you sing it first, then we'll talk about it afterwards. Vahisha Amda on page 62.
Vahisha Amda lavotenu velanu. Vahisha Amda lavotenu velanu. Shelo echad bilvad. Amad aleinu lechalotenu ella shebachol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu vehakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miadam.
Beautiful.
Yeah, fema'od.
So here's the reason. So it's the promise that God gave to Abraham first, that we would be enslaved, but that God would eventually bring us out of slavery. And then the Haggadah goes on to tell us that we're supposed to, by the way, have raised our cup when she was singing. Awesome. So I forgot about that. So Leah, we're going to pretend that you're singing for a moment here while we lift our cups. And then we're going to put it down, right? So what is the point of lifting our cups of wine? As I said earlier, the idea of wine or champagne at a big banquet, going back to Greco-Roman times, was making a toast, right? But here we're toasting God, right? Not the wedding couple. There's no wedding couple here. We're toasting God who took us out of slavery in Egypt. And that was the point of raising your glass during that passage there. So what this passage is basically saying is, it's not just a promise that God made to Abraham, it's a continuing process that happens every single generation, because for whatever crazy reason, there always seem to be people who don't like us, and yet we're still here 4,000 years later, right? So obviously that promise has sustained us through a lot of travail. And let me see what we're going to do next.
Well, we were going to talk about possibly the picture, although I think you've covered that, the picture on page 63.
Page 63.
Which was all the.
Oh, yes, right.
All the
Right. So
travails,
yes, yeah. So right. So that is exactly what that's there for, right? So this got a list throughout the centuries, several other times when Jews are being persecuted in one way or another. And of course, there's only a partial list. But tonight is a night of celebration. So let's go on to Arami Oved Avi.
On page 64, and Daniel, you're going to lead that?
Hineni, I am here.
Okay, you got it.
Today, I want to tell Adonai, our God, how I have come to be in the land Adonai promised our ancestors to give to us. My ancestor was a wandering Aramaean. He descended to Egypt and resided there in small numbers. He became a nation, great, powerful, and numerous. Then the Egyptians treated us badly. They persecuted us and subjected us to hard labor. We cried out to Adonai, the God of our ancestors. God heard our voice. God saw our persecution, our labor, and our oppression. He took us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, with awesome power, signs, and wonders. Then God brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land of milk and honey.
So that is a quotation from Deuteronomy chapter 26. And this is yet another way of telling the story. So we had Yale and we had Harvard weigh in on how to tell the story. This is actually before Yale and Harvard even got started. I guess it's like Oxford. So it was in the Holy Land, right? In the Mishnah, it already suggests that this is the best way to tell the story. And this passage, Deuteronomy 26, was used actually by our ancestors for the festival of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, when they bring in the harvest of fruits, the first fruits. And it was said they're supposed to go to the temple with this basket of first fruits and present it before the priest, and then recite these verses. So the rabbis of the Mishnaic period, back in Oxford, so to speak, ruled that since these verses were well known to everybody, because we had to do them for Shavuot, they also happen to tell the story of the Exodus in a simple way. Let's use it for the telling of the story for Passover as well. And so that was yet another way to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Now we're going to come to the plagues on page 78. And here I want to tell a story that my dad used to tell, my father used to tell at our Seders when I was growing up all the time. We're going to, for each plague that Diane chants, we're going to take a spoon or a fork or your finger, depending on how delicate you want to be. And we're going to pour off, this is a spoon here, some of the wine from our Kiddush cups to diminish our cup of joy. Wine represents joy. So we're going to diminish our cup of joy for each of the plagues. And the reason for doing that is that although it was Pharaoh's idea to keep us enslaved plague after plague, because he was stubborn and obstinate and he was the ruler of Egypt, a lot of innocent Egyptians didn't have anything to do with that decision, and yet they suffered also. And so we recognize their suffering and diminish our cup of joy by the suffering that they experienced. So now I want to tell the story my dad used to tell at our Seders, when he learned from one of his teachers. And this is a midrash found by the rabbis almost, I think it was written like 1800 years ago or so, a long time ago. It's a kind of remarkable story. You might have heard it. So when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, and then the Egyptian army is destroyed, is drowned and destroyed, and that was a necessary event, because if the army had not been destroyed, the Egyptian army could have just brought the slaves back to slavery again. So the army had to be destroyed for the slaves to be truly free. And it was at that moment that the Israelites started to sing and dance, because they realized they were, in fact, finally free. And the story about how Miriam, Moses' sister, got together with the women and they took out the timbrels and they started singing and dancing and playing musical instruments. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, God amongst the mighty? That's what they're singing and dancing. So in the rabbinic imagination, they're singing and dancing here on earth, and up in heaven, the angels start to sing and dance also. They see the Israelites dancing and say, hey, this is a great celebration. We can sing and dance too. But when God saw the angels dancing and singing, God said to them, stop. Can't you see my people are drowning? It's just a fascinating insight by this rabbinic person 1800 years ago or so. God didn't stop the Israelites from rejoicing. We're entitled to rejoice over our freedom, right? It's our freedom. We can be, happy about it. But the angels, God expected to have God's perspective. And God's perspective is he's the God of everybody. And his people are drowning, right? So God's not happy about this, according to the rabbinic idea, even though they were the enemies of the Jewish people. So with that in mind, we're now going to diminish our cup of joy for each of the plagues. Page 78. Blood. Frogs. Lice. Wild beasts. Cattle plague. Boils. Hail. Locusts. Darkness. The death of the firstborn. Okay. Okay, so now we've done the plagues, and we're now going to go to Dayenu, which is on page 82. This is a song I did not understand when I was a kid. It says, if God had only done this much for us, we would have been happy. And if he had only done that much for us, we should have been happy. But it says things like, if he had took us out of Egypt but hadn't parted the Red Sea. Well, if he hadn't parted the Red Sea, we wouldn't have crossed on dry land. The Egyptian army would have captured us. We'd be back slaves again. So would it really have been enough if he had taken us out of Egypt and hadn't parted the Red Sea? I didn't get it as a kid. The point of the song is that the miracle was not just one big miracle, it was many small miracles. And for each one of those small miracles, we should be grateful. Just like today, we should be grateful for all of the small miracles in our lives, the things we often take for granted. The fact that our bodies, most of us, their bodies for the most part function well, and they keep us alive, and we're able to think and feel and do things in the world. The fact that we have friends, we have family that love us and care about us, right? That we live in a civilized society. We have indoor plumbing, which we now realize is really important since the Great Freeze last month. And all the other blessings that we have every day, we should be very grateful for them. It's important to be grateful and thankful for all of the blessings in our lives. And that is what Dayenu is about. Page 82.
And I'm inviting the Vallarta family to lead Dayenu for us.
Hotzianu mi Mizraim, Hotzianu mi Mizraim, Dayenu, 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 Ilu natan lanu et hashabat, natan lanu et hashabat, Dayenu, 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 Ilu natan lanu et haTorah, natan lanu et haTorah, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu.
Okay.
Toda rabah.
Wonderful. Okay, so now that we're all feeling very grateful, we're going to go to yet another academy. Let's see, we had Oxford, Yale. How about Stanford? No, what's the other one? And name another one in England. What's Oxford's competition? Anybody?
Cambridge?
Which one?
Cambridge.
Cambridge, right? Cambridge. That's right, Cambridge.
Cambridge.
Yeah, so this is Cambridge University. Rabban Gamliel, it's on page 86, right? So why do I say Cambridge, right? Because Rabban Gamliel was also in Israel, and there are two Rabban Gamliels. And unfortunately, we don't know whether this was the grandfather or the grandson, because both of them were named Rabban Gamliel. Now, why does it matter? Well, if you are a New Testament scholar, then there is a Rabban Gamliel who appears in the New Testament in the book of Acts. And he actually is, I think he's favorably portrayed in the book of Acts. So this could be that Rabban Gamliel. That would be the grandfather. So that means that it was the grandfather who lived while the temple still stood and there were still sacrifices, and it would explain why he's going to do show and tell with the Passover lamb, because there is a Passover lamb to show. However, it could be his grandson. His grandson lived after the temple was destroyed, but he instituted a number of rules to remember the temple existed. And in which case he would be pointing to a shank bone to remind you that we used to do a Passover sacrifice. And unfortunately, the Jewish scholars are divided as to which Gamliel it is, the grandfather or the grandson. So we don't know. But his idea, as I just said, was to do a show and tell. Right? This is brilliant. He did this before PowerPoint and even before show and tell existed. He said, you've got all the stuff on the Seder plate before you. Tell the story using the symbols as a show and tell, right? So that's the way I'm going to do it. I'm not going to read from the book. This little thing over here, I'm told from our Beth Yeshurun kitchen, is a shank bone. Sometimes I use a little plastic doggy bone if I don't have one. Vegetarians sometimes use beets if you don't want to use an actual bone. But this is a bone, and this reminds us of the Passover lamb. This represents our freedom, because this lamb, we used the blood to put on the doorposts of the house so the angel of death would pass over. And that was the last meal we ate in slavery. In the morning, we left in haste on our way out the door. So this was the moment of recognizing our freedom was at hand. That's what this is. On the other hand, we have the bitter herbs represented here by horseradish. And that reminds us of the bitterness of slavery before we were able to leave. And what is the third symbol? The third symbol is the matzah, which, remember, I held up at the beginning and said, this is the bread of affliction. It's not a whole loaf of bread, it's a partial loaf. Poor people don't get whole loaves of bread, and they don't even get bread that has time to rise. They just get plain old crummy crackers, really, really crummy crackers. Anyway, so this is the bread of affliction we said at the beginning. But now Rabban Gamliel reinterprets the matzah, and he says, no, this is the bread that didn't have time to rise because they left Egypt in haste on their way out. They were already free, but they didn't have time to let the dough rise as they were running away from Egypt. So they ate it unleavened. So that means it represents the bread of freedom. So which is it? The bread of affliction, poor people's bread, or the bread of freedom that we left on our way out? And you might have heard me say this before, the matzah has two sides. And so it represents both. On this side, it's the bread of affliction, but on this side, it's the bread of freedom. So we have three symbols that are evenly divided. One represents freedom, one represents slavery, and one of them represents both. Okay, now we're done with Rabban Gamliel and Oxford and all the other places. Okay, now we're going to go on to
Page 90.
Page 90.
And Anne is going to read for us.
The whole door by door.
Okay, let me just grab page 90 here. 90 is okie doke. In every generation, one is obligated to see oneself as one who personally went out from Egypt. Just as it says, you shall tell your child on that very day, it is because of this that God did for me when I went out from Egypt. Not only were our ancestors redeemed by the Holy One, but even we were redeemed with them. Just as it says, God took us out from there in order to bring us and to give us the land God swore to our ancestors.
Right, it's all in the present tense about us, which means that we have to imagine that we ourselves are the ones who experienced this. And you can do that in one of two ways. You can either imagine what it was like to be slaves in Egypt 3,200 years ago, or you can just imagine all of the challenges and difficulties we all face every day and how we are planning to escape from them, how we're going to overcome the challenges in our lives today. What are the narrow places, the difficulties, the challenges that we intend to overcome? And as we do that, we're going to sing Hallelujah, which is Psalm 113 and 114. We're going to do both of them.
I think you were going to read
Oh, okay.
113, and I was going to do B'tzeit Yisrael.
Right. So there's a collection of Psalms 113 to about 116 that we call the Hallel Psalms. They praise God, and we do them on all the festivals. The second one, 114, is particularly about the Exodus from Egypt. So I'm just going to read the first part of Psalm 113 out loud in English, and then Diane's going to sing the Psalm 114 about leaving Egypt. Therefore, we owe it to God to thank and to praise and to honor, to bless and to acclaim the one who has done all these wonders for our ancestors and for us. God took us from slavery to freedom, from sorrow to joy, from mourning to festivity, from thick darkness to a great light, from enslavement to redemption. Let us sing before God a new song, Hallelujah. And we're going to make a toast here to God. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Okay, so I'm going to skip 113 actually, and we're just going to go to 114.
We'll sing this together then.
Page 94.
B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez. B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez. Hayta Yehuda lekodsho, Yisrael man shelotav. Hayam Ravayanos, Hayarden Yisov leachor, Heharim Rakaduka Elim, Givaot Kivnei Tzon, Malecha Hayam, Kitanus, Hayarden, Tisov leachor, Heharim, Tirkeduke Elim, Givaot, Kivnei Tzon, Milifnei Adon, Uli Aretz, Milifnei Eloah Yaakov, Ahochi Hatzor, Agamayim, Halamis, Lemaiноmayim. Okay, we now come to the part of the Seder. It's definitely dark outside now, so we can light the candles for the festival. So I'm going to excuse myself.
We're going to do that.
Light the candles.
We're going to do that off camera. So if you have candles that you haven't lit yet, you can light them now. Traditionally, you're not supposed to actually light a fire, like strike a match on Yom Tov. You are allowed to transfer fire on Yom Tov. So if you are following that particular rule and you already have lit for yourself a yahrzeit candle, which burns for 24 hours, you lit it last night so that it's ready for today, you can light a match from that yahrzeit candle and then use that match to light the festival candles and then say the blessing over the festival candles, which Diane is doing off camera right now while I explain this to you. So that's how you're supposed to do it. You can't even transfer a fire on Shabbat, which is why we had to wait until Shabbat was definitely over. And now we can transfer the fire to light the candles. And then we're going to continue. I'll explain the rest. We're going to continue with the blessing over the wine, the Kiddush, on page 96. And at the bottom, it says Bori Priya Gafen. But then we are going to turn back to the beginning. Let me find the beginning page. I'll put my thumb in the place. Page 10, where it has the blessings for Havdalah, which end the Sabbath and begin the new festival day. And then Shechianu at the bottom of page 10. Right? So if you follow that, we're going to do page 96 and then go back to page 10. And here comes Diane from off camera. Perfect time, perfect timing. Okay, so everybody lift your second glass of wine, and we're going to do the blessing over the second glass of wine. Go ahead.
Okay. Just break Priya Gafen.
No, the whole paragraph.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher ge'alanu v'ga'al et avotenu mimitzrayim v'higianu l'layla hazeh lechol bo matzah u'maror. Kein Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu higienu l'moadim v'liragalim acherim napa'im likratenu l'shalom. Semechim uvinyan ireka v'sasim ba'avodatecha v'gachal sham min hazvachim umin hapsachim asher yagia damam al kir mizpachacha leratzon v'nodeh lecha shir chadash al ge'alteinu ve'al pedut Nafshenu Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Okay, don't drink yet. Turn to page 10. Havdalah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei me'orei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lekol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael amin ben yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yemei hamaseh ben kedushat Shabbat l'kedushat yom tov hivdal tav et yom hashvi'i misheshet yemei hamaseh kedushat Hivdalta v'kiddushta et amecha Yisrael v'kiddushatcha Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh l'kodesh Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehefkeyanu v'kiyamanu Vehigianu lazman hazeh.
Amen. Wow, that was definitely a lot.
A lot of fine print.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to wash hands and get to the main course of the meal. So the Pharisees, actually the ones who instituted this idea of washing hands before a meal, it was done by the priests in the temple because the food that the priests ate in the temple was holy food. It was the leftovers from the sacrifices. And so they had to be in the state of ritual purity, including their hands. So they would ritually wash their hands before they ate their food. The Pharisees, who developed this idea of table fellowship, getting groups of people together to share a meal and conversation and so on, wanted to egalitarianize this process. And so they said, you know what, let's all pretend that the food we're eating is holy because it's all comes from God. So before we eat bread was the main thing, that main substance of a meal. So before we have a meal with bread, we're going to wash our hands ritually like the priests do. And then we'll say hamotzi. Of course, today we're not having regular bread, we're having matzah. And so there's actually two blessings we have to recite after washing our hands. One is for hamotzi, and the second is for being commanded to eat matzah.
We're on page 98.
Yeah, so it's on page 98. What I'm gonna, and you're not supposed to talk in between. That's why I'm explaining it all now. So we're gonna wash our hands ritually, dry our hands, and then we're gonna say hamotzi and alachilat matzah, and then eat matzah, and then we can talk again. Okay? So here we go. Washing hands.
Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah.
Delicious.
Yeah, you know, it's not bad the first night. It gets kind of old after a while, but it's all right the first night. Okay, so now the last thing we're going to do before we conclude our part. Oh, we have to have more first. So bitter herbs. So I recently read an article that horseradish was not the original bitter herb. It was kind of eaten by the Jews in Poland, again, who didn't have leafy bitter herbs to eat. So they could get horseradish, which is a root vegetable, and that's what they used. The preferred thing was actually a lettuce or an endive or something. So this is romaine lettuce. But romaine lettuce, as we know, is not really bitter. So I put a little bit of horseradish on top to make it bitter, as well as the original bitter herb. And then we're supposed to be dipping it in the charoset, which is the sweet fruit nut chutney. And this was, there's recipes for things like this in those Greco-Roman history books about symposiums and the kind of foods that they ate there. They had these sort of fruit nut chutneys. That's probably the origin of charoset, but now we use it to blunt the bitterness of the herb. So we're going to eat the bitter herb together.
And the blessing's on page 100.
Blessing is on page 100. So we're going to say the blessing and then eat it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. Okay, now the last thing we're going to do is from Hillel, and he was the head of the academy before there was an Oxford or Yale or Harvard or any of the other schools. Hillel was about 2,000 years ago. He lived when the temple stood, and naturally, Jewish people, we have to argue about everything. And so we're trying to understand the verse. It says you're supposed to eat the Passover lamb with matzah and bitter herbs. And so Hillel asked the question, what does the word with mean? Does it mean you eat the Passover lamb with matzah and bitter herbs at the same meal together? Or does with mean, no, they have to all be in your mouth at the same moment? So you have the Passover lamb, matzah, and bitter herbs together in your mouth. That's what with means. And he decided that it means the latter. It means they're all in your mouth at the same time. So long before the Earl of Sandwich invented the sandwich, Hillel invented the sandwich. Well, maybe the Romans, we think maybe the Romans did also. But anyway, he took a piece of matzah, he took some of the bitter herbs and a Passover lamb, which we don't have because we don't do sacrifices anymore, but we still have the matzah and the bitter herbs. So we mixed them together. And of course, if you're having bitter herbs, you have to put a little charoset on top of that also. And he made a sandwich. And so in memory of the Hillel sandwich, which he used to eat with the lamb, we're going to eat the Hillel sandwich even without the lamb. And that is called korek. And so that's on page 100, and we're going to eat it all at once. So now, unfortunately, we came to the point of the Seder where we have to serve the food. That's not really unfortunate because maybe people are hungry and they want to eat, but it means we're also going to be signing off. So once again, I want to thank everybody for coming and participating with us for this Seder. Next year, let's do it all in one big room together, or, we'll all have our own ones. And a copy of the Birkat Hamazon in the end, Ashley is reminding us, is in the chat box. If you haven't downloaded it, you can watch the video. Diana and I pre-recorded last year the grace after the meal.
Late at night when we were exhausted, so.
Yeah, we were a little bit tired when we did it, but we decided not to do a new recording this year. So it's the end of the meal, the Birkat Hamazon, and some of the songs and psalms that are sung at the end of the meal. So I hope if you would like to watch that, you can watch that. The link to it is in the chat box. And or it's all the text for it is also in the handout, so you can do it in your homes.
It was such a pleasure to see everyone. I wish we could have been together, but it was really so nice.
Yes,
Thank you
this year
very
we are
much.
here on Zoom. Next
Good
year,
job.
may we be in someone's living room.
Amen.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
It's in a chat. I don't know how to.
You have to look down here.
I did.
To the chat.
I did, but I don't know how to send it.
Look it up.
I just